Hi everyone, it's Dave again, East Rosebud Fly and Tackle here in Billings, Montana. Thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to continue the series. We're going to look at dry fly hackle, how it's graded, what you look for when you're buying a hackle, and the various items like that. So if we talk about the grading system, these are the feather merchants like Whiting. They have people who do nothing but grade all the necks and the saddles. And the grading system goes from the lower end hackle all the way up to the prime quality gold hackle. And the system is based on feather density, and you can check that by looking at the underside or the hide of the hackle. Each little pimple represents a feather. The darker, larger pimples are pin feathers, feathers that aren't fully developed yet, so of course you want to see a minimum of those. But so the higher the feather count on the hide, the higher the quality the hackle is. They also look at barb density, that is when we flex a barb, how many barbs per inch are there, which means how many flies can you get from a single feather. We look at feather length, how long the feathers are, and of course that varies from the very, very small 24s and smaller to the larger ones. And then we also look at webbiness. Now web, if you look at any feather, is the dark area, the almost misty colored area next to the stem, and you can see it's large at the base and it gets smaller as you get towards the tip. The webby areas are soft. They will soak up water, unlike the other hackle, which is the dry hackle, which will float the fly. So ideally for dry fly hackle, you're looking for a minimum of webbiness. Soft hackle is the other extreme. The webbier the better. So that's one indication of quality. Another is the size range. Now, necks and saddles are a little bit like apples and oranges. You buy a neck because you want a large size range in feathers. For example, from 28s all the way up to maybe 14s. You don't get as many feathers per size range because the feathers are like shingles on a house. Each row, the feathers are the same size, and as you get farther down the cape, the feathers get larger and larger. So for a neck, you're looking at size ranges. A saddle is more restricted in size ranges, but the feathers are much longer, and we'll look at that difference too. The color uniformity, particularly when you get into something like a barred hackle, a furnace, a badger. Do you have the color all the way down the tips, from the base of the feathers all the way down to the tips? Or do you have areas that are maybe dark or all black and don't have the barred part in them? That's an important aspect of the quality of the hackle. And then the barb stiffness, like we talked, it's pretty well connected with the webbiness. The more web you have in a hackle, the less stiff the barbs are. As we look at these hackles, I don't want to tell you what you shouldn't and can and shouldn't buy. It really depends on your needs. What are you tying? What are you trying to achieve? If you're going to be tying from small to large hackled flies, of course you want to look at a neck. If you're going to be tying more flies in the 14 to 18 size range, then a saddle is better for your needs. But we're going to look at the different grades so you can kind of get an idea what are you getting for your dollar, and that's very important. Now the grading codes go from the low end, this is with the Whiting hackle, the pro grade, then the high and dry, the bronze, the silver, and then the gold. The gold is the top quality hackle. There are also some midge hackles, and we'll look at the difference in those. So again, this is a bit apples and oranges, but I think we want to start with the neck. This is a pro grade neck, which is on the low end. If we look at this particular neck, this is a natural dun, which I really like for a lot of tying. I like it when you want a grizzly and a cream combination. A natural dun is a great single feather to use. The sizes on this run from about a size 4, which is fairly large, to a size 26. The larger feathers like this are fairly webby, and you're going to see this in a lower grade feather. Now again, it depends on your need, or if you're really trying to float a heavy, large fly, then this probably isn't the best hackle for you. If we look at the length of the barbs, if we look at the barb density, things that you must have when you're judging hackle is one, a hackle gauge, because these hackles can fool you. can look at them then when they're unflexed and think you have the proper size, and when you flex them and you check them against the gauge, they can be a much longer hackle than you originally thought. And to use a hackle gauge, all you have to do for a neck feather is to bend it in the middle, which is where you're going to be tying your fly, and look at how far the tips extend on the gauge. For example, this is an honest size 4. So again, this isn't the highest quality hackle. The feathers are fairly webby, but for some flies it can be very appropriate. For a beginner, you're just starting to tie flies, you really don't want to spend a lot of money on hackle, because hackle is your most expensive investment. Of any single fly tying material you're going to buy, hackle is your most expensive investment. Now if we look at, again, in a neck hackle, the difference between the bronze, which is a higher grade than we looked at the pro grade, you're going to see that you have a lot more small feathers, and these feathers are almost ungaugeable down to about a size 32. There's a lot less web. If you look at the larger feathers down here, and if you hold it up to the light and you look, don't be confused the difference between the web and the barred hackle. The web is the dark area that goes from the base all the way up to the tip, and you can see here that the web ends very close down by the base. Most of the feather is web free. So that's what you get when you get a higher quality hackle. The barb count is higher. There are more barbs per inch of feather. The barbs are longer. And if you look at the back, you'll see that the feather count, the density, the space between these feathers points are much closer together. So you have more feathers, you have longer feathers, and you have more barbs per feather. If you look at hackles even 20 years ago, this would have been a grade A prime Super Hoffman hackle. Whiting has come a long, long way in their hackle development in the last 20 years. It used to be where you would need 2 or 3 neck hackles to tie a single fly, and now you may be able to get 2 flies out of a single hackle. So the advancement in hackle has been immense. So this is a bronze grade, a neck again. So you can see some differences in the quality. The price of the bronze grade is around $75, and the pro grade is around $60. So for an extra $15, you get a better neck. So let's look at some saddles. Saddles are different than the necks, as I stated earlier. The saddles are more restricted in the size range of feathers that you're going to get, but the individual feathers are much longer. This is a high and dry, which is on the low end of the whiting grading scale. But again, this is not to dissuade you from using this hackle. I have many saddles in high and dry that are very satisfactory for palmering, like on caddis flies or things like that. Again, we can look at the back to get some idea of the feather count. You can see that the feathers are spaced fairly far apart, so you don't get as many feathers on the skin as you do with a higher grade cape. You'll also notice that you get a lot more webby feathers. The larger feathers are really more soft hackle type of feathers and aren't really very usable for a dry fly. Mostly these feathers are going to run size 14s. You get some 18s, but the size range is really very narrow. About 14 is about the average on this. If you look at a single feather, on saddle hackles you don't see near the web that you do on neck hackles. So the feathers are nice and long. They're fairly even as far as the barb density and the spacing throughout the feather. And another tool to use is just measure the length of the feathers. All you have to do is hold it like this and put a ruler up against it. And you can see that these feathers vary quite a little bit, from maybe 4 inches up at the top to about 12 inches at the bottom. So it's just, like I say, it's just not a prime hackle, but it's certainly good enough for a lot of uses. I wouldn't try to dress a really large dry fly and expect it to float well with this. You're going to have to use more hackle wraps to get it to float. But again, for palmering and things like that, the high and dry is certainly adequate. We move up 1 grade to the bronze grade, which is the next step up in the quality. And the things that you get with the higher quality hackle, get this out of here, is first of all, you get a higher feather count. If you look at the hide, the pins or the feathers are much closer together. You get more feathers per square inch of hide. The size range is a little nicer on the bronze range. This size is from, there's a lot of nice size 18 feathers here, all the way up to about size 14. It does have a nice high barb count. It's hard to see on video, but if you put this against your hackle gauge and spread it, you'll see that the barb count is very, very heavy barb count. And one thing that you need to be very critical of when you're looking at particularly like furnace or golden badger or anything like that that's a bicolored feather, do you get the colors all the way down to the tips? Some of these, the lower quality hackles, the upper feathers aren't well marked, the lower feathers are. These feathers are well marked from the base all the way down to the tip. And then if you look at this comparison and the length of the feathers, you'll see that these feathers range very easily 12 inches. And again, this is important because you can tie several flies with a single feather. I've tied as many as 14 dry flies on one saddle hackle, which differentiates it from a neck hackle. And we're going to bounce a little bit here. I wanted to show you, this is another bronze grade hackle, but this is a midge size hackle. This is kind of a specialty hackle. You can see that the feathers are typically much smaller. We're looking at size 20s and 22s instead of the more average 14s and 18s. So if you're tying a lot of smaller flies, then a midge hackle is a great value. Again, you get very long hackles with virtually no web. The feather count is high on it, as you can very easily see here. There's no pin feathers, and the feathers are very long. We're looking at least 12-inch feathers here. So again, that means more flies per feather. Coloring is good all the way down to the tips, and I can't see any web in these feathers whatsoever. So this is a bronze grade. To me, as a tyer, the bronze grade hackles represent the best values. As we look at the silver and the gold hackles, yes, they are a better hackle. The feather density is better, the barb density is better, the length of the feather is slightly better, but of course you're going to pay more for that too. And although I do own a couple of higher grade hackles, most of mine are bronze saddles. They're a great value, and the normal ones are around $90. The midge run a little higher. Now this is a silver grade, and this is only a half saddle. It's the only silver grade we have in stock right now. The silver and the golds are hard to come by. Not very many of the chickens meet these quality goals. As you can see, the feathers are very long. We're looking at close to 14 inches here. Because this is a half saddle, you don't get quite the size range as you do with a full saddle. But there are still from 12s to 16s in this. And if you're looking at just a smaller investment in buying hackle, then the half saddles or even the quarter saddles are a good way to go. But you're going to be paying more per feather for the less amount of feathers. So I try to save up a few more dollars and buy a full saddle whenever I can. So a silver hackle, and this is where it can really fool you. When you get into the silver and gold hackles, you look at a feather like this and you'll say, well, that's a 14. There's no doubt in my mind. Until you put it on a hackle gauge and you find out that the barbs are much longer than you thought they were. The barb density is fantastic, which means you'll need only a couple of wraps of hackle to hackle your fly, which consequently means you get more flies per feather. So it's all about the quality and the number of flies that you can tie with an individual hackle. Then we get to the princess of the parade. This is a gold hackle. Now, I don't see these very often anywhere. I don't know what the percentage is that whiting gets in gold every year, but it can't be very large. The first thing that impresses you when you look at a quality hackle like this is the length of those feathers. Those feathers are almost 16 inches long. Here's my 12-inch ruler, and they run another 6 inches past that. So you get extremely, extremely long hackles. If you're a professional fly tyer and every hackle wrap counts, then something like this could be of great value to you. You're going to be paying more like $130 for a gold grade hackle. So again, you get what you pay for. Feathers are extremely long. The barbs are as dense as they can be. And again, this can fool you when you look at a feather and think it's going to be a 14, but by the time you spread it, you see how long those barbs are. This is an honest, almost an 8, which is very, very hard to find in saddle hackles. So this would hackle a really large fly. So again, anytime you're considering hackle, it's best to come in and look at it if you possibly can. Of course, you can buy it over our internet site, and I find that the whiting grading system to be very fair. These people are professionals, they know what they're doing. But always, always keep in mind, what are your needs? Do you need a supreme quality hackle to float a heavy dry fly like a humpy that takes a lot of hackle turns? Or do you need something just a palmer, a caddis body, or a stimulator? You don't need quite as high a quality hackle for that. And as far as your budget allows, again, you can buy quarter and half saddles. I prefer myself to save up a little bit of coin and wait till I can buy a full saddle. I get a fuller range of sizes in the hackle, and it actually costs me less per feather. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to comment or come in and see us. Thanks for joining in. Good luck.